Things I want to talk about are facial features because that's where I see people struggle the most. So let's start with the eyes. My husband closes his eyes when he smiles, so we're going to look at someone else's. So you do still want to trace them. So it's the exact same as everything else. You're still tracing all of the major contours. So I'm going to go through and add that. If you have that eyelid fold, you'll want to trace that, trace the bottom. Same thing with eyebrows. If you have darker eyebrows, they'll probably just be solid black, and then you can take a tiny V-gouge and add some detail with those. You do want to trace the outside edge, and your pupil will also be solid black. What you do in this colored area is up to you. You can try to add some hatching or some value, or you could just carve it out completely white, right? So if this was my carving, I could just make that solid white, right? Either way, you do want to include these little highlights. So even if I do it solid black, you want to add those highlights. And then this is going to be carved out white as well, right? You do want to still include shading. So you'll notice in her eyes, it's still darker underneath this. So that's still going to be shaded in somehow with some value. Okay, so that's eye. Same with under here. Add some value under there so it shows that there's some depth. Okay. The next thing is the nose. And what I see people do a lot of the time is they want to outline the entire nose. It looks really squidward really quick. So you don't need to outline the entire thing, especially up here. Usually I just outline the nostrils, definitely shade those in if you can see them. And then sometimes you might want to include a line there or a line here where kind of the top of your nose is a little bit rounded. So that is how I would do the nose. Shading is going to be similar, right? So you have your shading on the shadows, maybe crosshatch. And remember, you're not bound to do crosshatching. You can do cross contours. You could do stippling, so a bunch of dots. You don't have to just do straight lines. That's just what I'm doing for the demo, right? The next one are the lips. If you look at lips from profile, they look something like this, right? I mean, that's a very simple drawing. Usually light comes from somewhere towards the top. So your top lip's actually going to be mostly in shadow. Your bottom lip is where the light hits. So your bottom lip is usually going to be lighter than the top lip. So sometimes I'll even just make the top lip solid black. And then I'll shade in the bottom lip with some value. I usually don't outline the lip because it kind of looks like lip liner from like the 90s. So usually I just kind of hint that there's a shadow here, and then underneath the bottom lip there's a shadow. So right here is the shadow. So that is how you're going to define the bottom lip, right? If you have teeth, it's very tempting to want to outline every single tooth, but that looks really scary really quick. It gets a little bit piratey. So I usually prefer not to outline the teeth. Instead, what I will do is just basically imply that they are there. So I'll usually do just one line, kind of imply where they break up, but I definitely do not outline every single tooth. Usually with features, less is more, okay? The last thing I want to show you is hair. If you have darker hair, so my husband, he has kind of medium blonde hair, but we'll say it's dark for this demo. Essentially, you're going to keep the entire head of hair black, and then when you are ready to carve, you'll go in with a tiny V-gouge and add some details with the V-gouge. So we'll say that I'm shading this all in black, and then if my white is the gouge mark, so what I'm carving away, I could then go in with my tiny V-gouge and just add some of the texture. You do not need to do every single hair. Again, it starts to look really confusing really quick, so less is more when it comes to hair. If you have overall fairly light hair, it's going to be the exact opposite. So on this side of his head, he kind of has lighter hair. You're going to shade in the chunks that are in shadow, just solid, and then you'll go in and just add some of the texture with black lines. Again, less is more, especially when it comes to hair. If you try to do long streaks of hair, it's just going to look like lines. It doesn't really look like hair. Okay. So those are some of the things that I see people kind of switch up the most. If you're having issues, shoot me an email. We can brainstorm some things together. But the more value you have, the better it's going to turn out as a print. It looks kind of crazy because I'm doing it in Photoshop. But I promise if you have a gradient from black clear to white, that's what's going to make it look 3D and look like yourself. So please, please, please take your time. Make sure you have a range of values because that's what we're focusing on this project.